Call the meeting of the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee to order. Our first item is call for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Did you receive any requests? There have been no requests for public comment, so we will move on to the approval of the minutes from the October 12th and 17th meetings, which are in the packet. Supervisor Zhang moved to approve. Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Lemmer. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approval of the minutes will signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries. We'll jump to 6A. Utility easement, Curling Way, parcel ID number 2291-2808-063-0996. Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In your packet, there is a draft easement document. So I was actually contacted by the Wisconsin Public Service Corporation about a property that the county owns. Its street address is on Curling Way. Our property abuts a property that's owned by a railroad, and the railroad apparently is in need of some electrical utility upgrades. In order to accomplish those upgrades, the electric utility is asking for us to grant them an easement to come across our property to make some of these upgrades. They include underground upgrades as well as overhead wire upgrades. My initial question when I received the request from Wisconsin Public Service Corporation was, if we are permanently encumbering our property, how much do we get paid for that? Which then led me to come to this committee. A couple of things for your consideration. The first would be just looking at the proposed easement document, which was not drafted by us. There is some internal inconsistency that Chair Robinson mentioned to me before today's meeting, but it does talk about adding manholes, other covers, constructing what would be permanent facilities on our property. The other piece is that it lacks really an indemnity clause, which if someone's doing some work on one of our properties, that would be something I would want to look for in any case, but especially a property like this where there had been previously some environmental work done near the property or on the property. And then the third piece to consider is, does this committee wish to look for some compensation for this type of easement? I don't think we have a policy in place about that, but in my mind it made sense to have that discussion. So I guess what I would be looking for is some direction from the committee on, do you want me to go back to the Public Service Corporation and ultimately the neighboring landowner and try to get some additional answers on compensation as well as on editing and modifying the proposed easement? Or what other direction would you want to provide me on this?
Michael called me last week and we discussed it. One of the concerns that I had is that given the proximity to the Holtz-Krause landfill and given the fact that this is a former Gustafson Oil property, and I know that there were some significant environmental issues associated with that property, that we wanted to make sure that if anything was excavated and there were any issues associated with it, that be the responsibility of either WPS or the railroad that is seeking the easement. So I shared with him the continuing obligations associated with the landfill, but I think it would be in the county's interest to seek that indemnification provision. And then I guess the purpose in the buildings and structures, paragraphs 1 and 3 are again inconsistent, that a manhole is a structure, and I think we want to make sure that there's consistency in the document. And then we don't access utility land without a payment, and the question is what payment do we want, or do we want to seek a payment from them? So Michael did a great job of outlining those issues. Any discussion? Supervisor Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned that you weren't sure if we had a policy in place for something like this, but do you have any previous examples or precedent about payments that we've asked?
We have had a few easements, permanent or temporary easements, that we've granted over, well, I've only been corp counsel for a year, so I don't have a really lengthy history, but we have received compensation for those, and generally speaking, I think it behooves us to at least inquire about compensation when we're encumbering our property, especially without an end date to it.
Other questions? Dale? Supervisor Marshall?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is it appropriate to put an end date? Is that common for this type of easement?
I would say it's not common, but it could be a discussion point as far as what is the length here. My thought would be if they're installing some kind of facilities that are meant to remain on our property for a length of time, they're not looking for an end date, but I think the conversation is an important one to have.
Chair Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, indemnification of any kind of work on that property is almost a necessity, in my belief. And I think there is value for the taxpayer to say, I mean, if they were coming to private property owner, they would be paying something for the use of that property. So I don't view Marathon County's property any different than private property. We need to protect the interests of the taxpayers. So I would say that there needs to be some kind of compensation.
So Mike, with the issue is before us today is is your preference to give you direction relative to seeking correcting the internal consistencies, to work on the indemnification provisions, and to work on a fee for the easement, and then bring that back to the committee, or authorize you to finalize an agreement addressing those concerns?
Either of those sound fine to me, whatever the committee prefers.
So what are your wishes? Yeah?
I think it would be helpful if we see what is negotiated. I would like to see that in the future.
All right, is that a motion to direct the Corporation Council to enter into negotiations with Wisconsin Public Service for the purposes of obtaining an easement, addressing the issues of indemnification, addressing internal inconsistencies, and negotiating a fee?
That's the motion.
That's what I thought I heard you say. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all those, Kurt?
Mike, was there any concern from WPS as far as time sensitive on this?
I think the concern was starting work before winter, but it's October 25th, so I think it's probably a concern on their end, but I wasn't given a specific hard date on this. So.
That tends to accelerate the timeline for negotiations.
Their failure to plan is not our necessity to include an emergency.
Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor of adoption of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. We'll now move on to the discussion of the strategic plan. We've had this issue before us in the past. The desire of the committee was to wait for some of the other committees to weigh in, and there are a couple of areas of the strategic plan where we have a not a leadership role, but a secondary role in those. Those other committees have made recommendations. They are in the amended packet. And I know there are some members of the committee that would like to see us deal with some other areas. So I would open the floor for discussion of the objectives for the strategic plan. Supervisor Leahy, did you want to make any comments?
Not particularly, thank you. No,
Sorry for
I
putting
think,
you on the spot.
No, I think I'm also on the Health and Human Services Committee, so I know that we had gotten ours finished earlier. My main question, I guess, is kind of the process going forward. I guess I'm maybe unclear about this committee's role in amending or changing what these other committees have now brought before us, or if that, are these still going to the exec committee before the full board? Maybe just to clear up some of that would be helpful.
So the process, as I understand it, is that the committees make recommendations relative to changes, and those go to the executive committee, and ultimately, any change needs to be authorized by the full board to build into the short-term strategic plan update. So we are in that process. Some of the committees completed their work, some committees completed their work and decided to revisit their work. So it's an ongoing iterative process. So you, again, had wanted to see what some of the other committees had recommended. Supervisor Marshall.
I look at the outcome measurements as kind of like a key performance indicators, something we're striving for, and it would be helpful if we labeled them as primary control / influence or secondary. I see a lot of goals in there that we have, in my opinion, little control over, and we should be focusing on the primary things that we can control. So that would be my comment, is let's focus on the things we have influence over. Thank you.
All right. Supervisor Hart.
And I had one more question on kind of that process too. So I know we have, the recommended changes from public safety, infrastructure, and another committee. I kind of wanted to ask, what specifically, are we looking at all of these, or are we just looking at the ones that are pertinent to our committee? Because I'm kind of asking where the debate overall is on the strategic plan. Does that come here, or should, because I could have comments on all of this, but when is it appropriate to have that? Should I wait until those go to the full board, or should we just talk about what is, like I said, pertinent to our committee? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I think the strategic plan is on the table. I think most of the committees have tended to look at those items that were under their jurisdiction and then deal with the other issues at the full board. Given the fact that we, through the budget and financing, have probably broader involvement in issues in other committees, you probably will need to take a look at it based upon the issue before us. I don't know if that clarifies, Cody. So what are your wishes relative to the strategic plan? So we know that we have before us the modifications to 12.3, dealing with from the Public Safety Committee, promote cost-effective and high-quality public services, deleting the word safety. They made some recommendations in there that has gone to the executive committee. Any questions on 12.3 with the adding, seek out funding partners to develop and implement a proposed Marathon County Forensic Science Center and adopt and maintain and fund employee class compensation plans and government policies that prioritize retention and recruitment of high-quality, skilled workforce needed to deliver government services. That clearly would be a HR function that would fall within this committee, and a budgetary issue, but any thoughts on those? And then they've got the outcome measurements. And Supervisor Lemmer, and then Supervisor Hart.
I'm not sure if I'm putting this in the right place, but on the draft that is here, they have crossed off the word, or have they added the word safety? But 12.3 is just promote cost-effective public services. There's a different outcome, comp plan strategy with the public safety in mind. So I guess I'm confused about that. And then I'm not 100% sure if the strategy that I want to add would go under this 12.3. But I would like to focus on renewable energy, and I know that's in the comp plan, but it's not really addressed here in the strategic plan. So I guess I would need a little guidance and help me get a clear path to where I would like to see this go.
Well, again, I believe that because we're opening up the plan, that we have the ability to modify the language in it relative to the current situation. So what the Public Safety Committee did is in order and before us, and they were seeking to expand the coverage to all services in the county, but high quality. And then they added the additional F and G. So anything is on the table right now if you have a thought. Supervisor Marshall, then Supervisor Zhang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do look at the outcome measures as things within the control of the county. So measures 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1, 2, and 3 are all things that are within the influence of the county, so that I approve of.
Okay. Supervisor Zhang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I just have a question about procedure as well too. We obviously, as we know, when we dissolved the Diversity Affairs Commission earlier this year, we also had other duties, the roles and responsibility that was included to the standing committee here. I guess I'm just kind of curious as to whether it would be a possibility or even discussion to start looking at adding the objective 3.8 into the strategic plan, whether it's into the modifications, or I guess when would it be appropriate to have that discussion? That's my question, I guess.
Again, the issue is, what are we making recommendations? What recommendations are we willing to make? I'd like to, if we can at this time, just deal with 12.3 and we can come back to that issue. So we've got some order, so we're not bouncing around. Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this one relates to 12.3. It's kind of echoing one of the other sentiments about the outcome measures. I see that, the first one is completed. The second one, staff suggests a new measurement. And then the third one here kind of suggests that it's completed, but it's not. I guess it's kind of just saying that the goal was met in a way. So I just wanted to recommend some suggestions for possibly some new outcome measures, specifically relating to retaining talent, specifically for the public sector and our county employees. And I know that Molly's had discussions about retention, and I think we should include some of those as a goal in order to keep the talent we have. I know turnover, especially people who just started here a year or two, is definitely a problem. So the two that I had suggested specifically would be an outcome measure. And I think this could be more, I would make these suggestions and then I would have staff kind of perfect them, because those are the experts in employee relations. So the first one that I had suggested was reduce the county's turnover rate of resignation type specifically by 35% by December 31st, 2024. That percentage is, I'm open to moving that. My rough calculations was that that would put us back to where we were on average between 2016 and 2020. And then the second one suggestion was to reduce the county's year-over-year early turnover rate by between 35 and 40% by December 31st of 2024. And again, that would put us back in line with where we were at in the previous 4 years prior to 2020. And then just finally on that, and then in more relation to Supervisor Lemmer's comments about renewable resources, I would say if we were to include that anywhere, it would be in 12.3 because that's promoting cost-effective and high-quality public services. So if we want to do that, that would include an initiative for renewable resources. And it's more of, I just read an article today that said one of the energy providers was increasing rates by 13% for small households and 6% for corporations. I have no idea what we're qualified as. That particular provider, it provides energy to a small portion of this county. So I can't imagine their rates are going to impact us, but I know that's a trend. The move for renewable resources is more so we have control over our energy needs. So we're not at the whims of whenever energy prices fall and increase, we kind of have something to stabilize it. And it is going to take an investment, that's for sure. And that's where I think that should fall in line with your, and those are the comments I have so far for this. Thank you.
Supervisor Lemmer.
I think Supervisor Hart worded what I was wanting to talk about is the cost of energy is certainly going up, and I know we're not ready to 100% go to renewables, but it seems to me we really need to start planting seeds, and it will eventually equal out into a savings. So I just would really like to get a strategy where we are supporting renewable energy in the county with some of our facilities.
All right, so we have three concepts before us at this time. I don't have any motions. I have a suggestion to create a new outcome measure, number 4, reduce the county's turnover rate by 35% by December 2024. Is that correct? What are your wishes relative to that? Supervisor Hart.
I would make a motion to add that one and the other one in particular.
Let's deal with them if we can, one at a time.
Sure, then I would make a motion to add that for this committee.
All right, is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Leahy. Any discussion? Any discussion? Supervisor Gibbs.
So the question becomes, what are the strategies that we're going to utilize to do that if the turnover, depending on what the turnover rate is or what the reason for the turnover rate is, some of it may be in our control and some of it may not be in our control. So it really comes down to what's causing the turnover. If the turnover is the economy, and the growth in the economy, I don't know that we can do anything about that. But if we have a contracting economy, we might, that may self-correct. So I guess the question becomes, what's within our control? Obviously, we're looking at flexibility for our employees. We're looking at a compensation study that we're implementing to try to curb some of those. I guess, is there other things that we're looking at as far as implementation to try to do that would be the only question I would have.
And the chair would ask, are you intending to have this tie into strategy G?
Yeah, more specifically strategy G, and then kind of using that as a direction for staff to, as a goal, as a aspirational goal for us to try to reduce that. And I know, yeah, there are plenty of things that are outside of our control, but the class compensation, for example, just making sure that that's implemented properly, I don't see how we could not implement that properly, but that would be one of those strategies that we could use. On top of flexibility, I know another thing that we have been talking about is the potential for us to go to a 4-day work week within this building in particular. That would be something that could help meet that strategy too. I know I've talked about, the younger generation looking for more flexibility within hours, and I know that that can be something that is also within our control. I'm willing to flex this particular one to make it so we can control what we can control within reason, and with not setting ourselves for an unrealistic expectation, especially with the state of the economy. Thank you.
Supervisor Zhang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, another strategy that we can also talk about is obviously efforts that the Greater Chamber of Commerce, Greater Wausau Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Wausau Prosperity Partnerships are working on to try and attract and retain individuals. I mean, there's several strategies that are included in there that we as a county haven't really truly embraced as well too. So I think we need to evaluate that, and I would support Supervisor Hart as well. Although I'm a little, the only concern I have is I'm wondering if 35% is a little high. That's just my thoughts. I guess I would turn to staff and get their opinion on whether that's achievable. I want us to be realistic, set high goals, but also be realistic as well.
I think that's yours, Molly. Or Lance.
Yeah, I think the achievability is something that we could certainly look into. I do have some concerns with the age of our workforce and the number of employees that are retirement eligible. That's approximately 25% of our workforce. So there, of course, there will be separations that are unavoidable. So I'd want to go ahead.
And that is why I specifically wanted this to target specifically resignations and not retirements.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I missed that.
Because I understand that we can't control
Thank you
retirements
for the
at all, but
clarification.
specifically raise the retirement age. But we, that's why I wanted to address that specifically, because I do know that that is also a big challenge for us, that we are going into baby boomers retiring at a large rate, and I think that's accelerating every single day. So I want this outcome measure to specifically target resignations that could be with our control. And I am very, very open to flexibility to that percentage, almost to the point where I would amend my motion to take out that percentage and then have Molly's staff put in a percentage that would, again, get it more to the level of where it was before the pandemic. If that works.
I think what
Thank
we
you.
what we typically consider acceptable rate is about 10%, and that is again assuming that the separations are individuals that we would want to move out of the organization, the lower performers. So I think again that's the kind of the industry standard of what's acceptable.
If I may, then because what is our separation rate as of right now, or in generally as of right now? Because then I would amend that to make it, can we get that back to a 10% separation rate in general then? If that's more realistic of a
Yeah,
measure.
I would be supportive of a 10% attrition annualized number. Yeah.
So is that an amendment to your motion of replacing?
I don't know exactly where that language would come into place, but like I said, I would be open to having staff kind of direct where that percentage would go exactly. Again,
This
to
is
get
a
us back to
policy
that.
and a strategic plan issue that is a county board product. It is not a staff product. So if you wish to have something considered, you need to be specific as to what that consideration and outcome measure is. So we can lay it on the table to give staff an opportunity to develop it, but ultimately it is this committee's and the county board's decision as to what those percentages are. We can't direct staff to come up with those percentages. So somewhat arbitrary, but if we need to have the measurements in that are measurable. Yee.
Two questions. I guess one is for Molly. Is the 10% a statewide standard or is it a national standard? I'm just to get some clarification.
Yeah, that's just what's considered an acceptable standard, an industry standard. So that specific to the state of Wisconsin or in public service, I would have to do a little bit more research on that.
So would it be appropriate to amend I believe the current motion is to reduce the county resignation rate by 25%, if I'm understanding, 35%, is that correct? So if we were to amend that 35% to 10%, is that what we're looking for?
Is that a question for?
Yes. Just trying to get a better understanding of where we are.
Supervisor Leahy.
I think that would require just a bit of a language because the original motion was to reduce by, but I think we want to reduce to or something like that.
That's what I'm trying to figure out there.
So then, I think I've figured this out. So then, I don't know if this would be scrapping that or amending it to exactly this. Reduce county turnovers rate of resignation type separations to 10% by December 31st, 2024.
So
Does that sound realistic?
35% of our 16% is that 5.5. So by reducing that, we would essentially get to 10%. So they're pretty much the same. So good math. But
Chair Gibbs. You want to just grab the one behind you?
Just a question, the turnover rate, is that within 1 year? Is that within 2 years? So I guess the question, clarifying as far as what are we talking as far as a turnover rate and time period?
I calculate that as an annualization. So month over month, I annualize that number.
So we either have a substitute amendment or an amendment, but we have a idea floating in search of a second.
And I would consider that a substitute amendment then.
Is that a second to the substitute amendment? All right. So do you want to read what you have?
No. I'm going to have to go back and listen. Because I didn't get it all.
Reduce the county, what I have, reduce the county's turnover rate due to resignations to 10% by December?
And we could, also
2024.
say attrition if that works a little bit better. Reduce, or I guess I'm looking for help on language too. I want to make attrition rate 10% again by 2024.
Well, attrition includes,
I guess attrition
Retirements.
specifically relating to resignations.
Resignation type separations.
And that's what I have written. And then it was just from by to.
so I have turnover rate as part of the emotion that was seconded. Is that what we're dealing with? You floated the idea of attrition rate. It would be Supervisor Marshall.
I believe we've seen statistics on the turnover rate, so that is the language the department is using, so we should probably continue to use that, would be my opinion.
I'm sorry,
The turnover rate is a rate that we've been quoted in the past, and especially in the compensation study. So it's a rate she's already calculating. So as to not make more work for Molly, I support calling it a turnover rate. Thank you.
Chair Gibbs.
I think the turnover rate, though, does include retirements, and so now we've complicated that calculation if we're looking at exclusively resignations, and that's what, if the supervisor is wanting to get at the resignation portion, if we include in the calculation of the turnover rate, that includes retirements currently.
Could I make a suggestion that in light of the fact that we seem to have confusion relative to the language, and we will be meeting in, before the next executive committee meeting, that we perhaps lay it on, lay it on the table, work on the language, and try to get it out beforehand so we have a chance to look at it? Because I think there's confusion over where we're at. Chair Gibbs?
I'll make a motion that we postpone language and work on this motion till the next Finance Committee meeting.
And I would be in favor of that.
That's a second. Any discussion on postponing? If not, all those in favor of postponing this discussion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. So I would ask that Supervisor Hart and Molly work on framing that language, and we try to get it available so we can distribute it to the committee before that meeting. All right. Did you want to also include the discussion of your second outcome measure in that discussion and then bring them in together? Yes. All right. So we will proceed that way. Supervisor Lemmer.
So I have thank you, Mr. Chair, but I have I have a concept. I have no language. So I would need some assistance with this. But given the fact that we've got, infrastructure money, and we have a objective 12.3 that talks about cost-effective public services, and energy costs are going up, I would really like to see some help with getting that language in here. I don't know if Supervisor Hart has something he was thinking of. Okay.
Supervisor Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I also like this idea of exploring renewable energy, and I wonder if that's what we should be looking at as the exploration as we talk about this next strategic plan. If we don't have any specific infrastructure or service in mind, is this the point where we express interest in these other committees exploring what they can do? I don't know. It just feels like maybe we're in the research stage and we're not quite ready to put an actual policy into practice.
I would just direct the committee's attention to the initial proposed work plan where we had a renewable energy policy and determined the committee role in determining policies aimed at the county becoming more environmentally and fiscally sustainable. Was something we talked about a couple of meetings ago and had floated. It was not one of the priority items that the committee had adopted or recommended at that time, but there might be the language that you might want to look at. I would point out that with the new bipartisan, with the inflation legislation, there is for the first time a modification to the tax credits for government. In the past, they didn't qualify for tax credits, but because of the new legislation, the counties would be eligible for up to a 30% payment in lieu of the tax credit for investments that they make in renewable energy. So that would change the dynamics that we were facing with in the past. So. Supervisor Lemmer.
So is this more appropriate than to keep it in our work plan and pursue it from that venue instead of creating a strategic plan for the whole board to consider?
That would be an option, and we'll be talking about that work plan next. Chair Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's so many things that are around that, you've got electrical vehicles, you've got renewable natural gas from the potential solid waste department, wind energy, solar energy. I think that it would potentially be of more benefit if we had a task force look at the totals that total concept and where that fits potentially, and bring back some suggestions. But that means that we may want to look at creating a task force that deals exclusively with those options, because I think there's so many differences. You know, do we put solar panels on top of the courthouse, for example? I'm thinking outside the box. So I think there's a lot of things to consider, and you know, where's that fit? And if we bring it on as another issue for HR Finance Committee, it might be something that doesn't get enough attention directly, totally. That would be my thought.
So an option would be at a subsequent meeting to make a request of the executive committee and ultimately to the county board to create a task force to do that. But that is not an item that we have on the agenda for today, so we would, if the desire is to pursue the task force, we can put that on at a future meeting. I'm seeing nodding for concurrence. All right. Supervisor Leahy.
I also like that idea because the renewable energy involves so much more than just public safety or just finance. I mean, you could have a representative from so many of our standing committees that would probably want to weigh in and would have a lot to add.
I'd like to suggest that we might want to engage Renew Wisconsin in the formation of that. They work on renewable energies, and it's an accepted and proven entity that has thoughts in what other communities might be doing. So we might want to engage them in that discussion going forward, and certainly as a resource for any task force that would be created. So with that, we will place it on an agenda at a future meeting. With that, we'll now, anything else on 12.3? We'll come back to that at our next meeting. Yi, I'll turn it over to you relative to your request relative to, or your inquiry relative to 3.8.
I guess we could run through the rest of the strategies here, objectives first before I guess that. I guess it was more of a process question than really an inquiry addition to it at the moment here.
Okay. All right, we have 10.8. Did I go over 10? I'm going over them in order in the packet. So we have 10.8. We have a strategy C that was added. I don't know that we want to necessarily get in conflict with other committees, but rather we can resolve that issue on the board floor. Are there any modifications to 10.8 at this time? Supervisor Hart.
It's not a modification, but it is agreeing that I do agree that that would be something that we could talk about on the board floor at a future time, and something that wouldn't necessarily be within our purview on this committee. Thank you.
All right. Anything else? If not, we'll move on to Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do see that outcome measure 1, maintaining a 3 to 5 year inventory of developable land within a municipal business and industrial park, is really not within our control. What our municipalities leave, it's a great goal, but I'm wondering how we influence that. As well as the number of private sector full-time and part-time employment positions.
Those are very valid concerns.
I can't provide rationale, but I can provide hopefully a little bit of history. And in fact, on the first one, Supervisor Baker, the outcome measure number 1 that's on the sheet, that's a new proposal. And I met with Supervisor Baker, and he's here, he can address that. But there are actually some strategies where counties in the state of Wisconsin do have a role. They do cooperate with local municipalities. The best example I can give is Chippewa County. I spoke with their administrator earlier this week on this very point, in fact. Chippewa County and the municipality of Chippewa do cooperate relative to maintaining an inventory of industrial park land. That partnership seems to be changing, but simply put, and the county actually did it, Marathon County did it some time ago with Mosinee. So I'll start with Marathon County. Many years ago, the county purchased the land that ultimately became the Mosinee Industrial Park, had a partnership with the city then, that the city was responsible for the development and ultimately the sale of those pieces of property. And then the county was, in fact, in some form or fashion, made whole through the sale. And that's somewhat similar. It's an oversimplification of what Chippewa County does with the village, or excuse me, the city of Chippewa. But those sort of partnerships do exist within the state of Wisconsin. And the reason, and Supervisor Baker can certainly provide more explanation as to the thought process there, but the previous goal had been that by December 31st, 2022, utilization of available vacant business and industrial park space will increase by 5%. And correct me if I'm wrong, Supervisor Baker, but the thought process behind the need for a different goal was, well, if you do that over time, essentially you run out. And I think that's a very logical concern, and you don't want to not have industrial park space. You want to make sure there's whatever the kind of Goldilocks zone of industrial park space is, right? You don't want too much that you have invested a great deal of money and perhaps over-invested, but at the same time, you don't want too little of supply such that the necessary growth or potential for growth can't occur. So that's my attempt, but Supervisor Baker certainly can elaborate.
Do I have the floor?
Go ahead.
Thank you. So I want to start out by saying that I agree with Supervisor Marshall that there are many outcome measures in our plan that are not under direct control. I've made this comment at various meetings. In spite of that, as I developed those, I did them with the thought that the board as a whole has agreed that we would look at aspirational outcome measures. So many of those are. I don't prefer those, and I think that's a topic that we could discuss as a board. But so I'm not. So I don't disagree with Supervisor Marshall at that at all. And Administrator Leonard accurately described the reason that we changed that outcome measure 1, and that actually language is directly out of the comprehensive plan, the 5 to 8 year inventory. We have not identified a great way to really quantify what that is. So there's some work there yet. And then I'll take credit or responsibility for strategy C and outcome measure 3, and I'm sure there'll be many minutes of discussion at the full board. There already has been at the executive committee. So that's my district, and I think it would be good for the county. But that's all I'll say at this meeting. Thank you.
All right, anything else? And I know that we had, as it relates to outcome measure 1 and 10.6, I know that United Way had identified reducing the number of self-sufficient households in Marathon County. And I know that that's, the United Way has changed their theme to United to Thrive, and they've adopted that, and we might want to, and I mentioned it, but I haven't had a chance to check on what those numbers would be. Supervisor Zhang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Supervisor Marshall's question in regards to, or one of the other supervisors in regards to what role do we have to play with outcome measurable 2 as well too, if I recall, about how we would affect the number of private sector. I guess, is there a way we can provide some clarification in this as well too, where we can provide, or it's just something, so that way we know that we have a role to play in the private sectors as well.
You can offer additional language if that's your desire, either now or on the floor.
It's just a question. I don't have something specific.
Again, I'm a little reticent to change what another committee does because our rules allow or don't, allow one committee to trump another committee, and that's something that we would ultimately resolve on the county board's floor as we move ahead. So recognizing the integrity and the roles of various standing committees, I'm a little reluctant to contradict or change, and we'll have that opportunity later. Supervisor, or Administrator Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for, again, a historical context, outcome measure 2 does currently exist in that form, with the sole modification being the date. That in the previous plan, it was by December 31st, 2022, the number of full-time and part-time employee positions in Marathon County will increase or be maintained. So the language is essentially the same. I believe the only thing that was changed in terms of recommendation was the date. I'll give you my 2 cents as your administrator. This has been one of those areas where I have asked for some additional clarification from the board. What is the expectation of county government, particularly staff, relative to economic development? There are counties, just like I gave the example of Chippewa County and what they do relative to economic development. We don't have formal economic development staff. I've said this at the Extension Education Economic Development Committee meeting. That doesn't mean we can't have them. If the board makes it a priority, that we can provide you with some potential avenues through which you could play a more significant role. But right now, again, in terms of economic development, we do provide through your annual budget, I should say, historically, you've provided funding to McDevco, Marathon County Development Corporation, to do entrepreneurial boot camp training. They now also provide staff support out at the Entrepreneurial Center on 72nd Avenue. So we have, and counties do have the ability by statute to play a role relative to economic development. If you want to provide further clarification or further information on what you're looking for, that would be greatly appreciated, and we can bring back some potential ways to do that.
Supervisor Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Seeing as, McDevco's role is more about helping entrepreneurs, helping new businesses, helping micro businesses turn into larger scale businesses. I know they're kind of focusing right now on small manufacturing. They have initiatives to help minority business owners. Perhaps goals or measures of that nature, focusing on the areas that they're already focusing on what their mission is would make more sense as opposed to just a blanket statement about existing jobs being filled. If we're looking at what role Marathon County as a government has, perhaps it's more along the mission that McDevco already has, which is more about entrepreneurship and the creation of new businesses, as opposed to this does just seem like a very large blanket statement that isn't a role that, from what I can tell from my time on the board, that we've really focused on.
Supervisor Zhang.
I also agree with Supervisor Leahy as well too. It would be nice to also have some specific measurables or deliverables to meet that. I mean, right now, currently, it's extremely broad by just stating that the number of private sector full-time and part-time employee positions Marathon will increase. Well, if increased by one jobs, we're technically meeting that measurable. So I guess if we could think of some way specifically to try and further clarified our success, that would be great as well too. And I like Supervisor Leahy's idea of really throwing in the programs that we're participating with already, or we're part of, which is McDevCo specifically.
Chair Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think one thing that I would probably remind the committee is that ultimately it's this board that develops the program and direction for McDevCo. So we should be setting not the other way around. We do have members of the board on McDevCo's board, but again, this county provides resources to McDevCo for gap financing, for other things, and we need to set what expectations we want from McDevCo. So I think what the administrator's point is where is the county's role in, if it is exclusively directing McDevCo, that's fine. If it's not, if it's internal, then we need to understand that and develop the resources and what those are. So I think one of the two things, I think I'm not saying that they're not conducive, but I think we need to be owning what we're asking McDevCo to do. And I think that's, in fairness to them, I think they've sometimes asked us, what do you want us to do?
Supervisor Baker.
So just for clarity, in response to Supervisor Leahy, we have an objective 10.10 that is much more directed to McDevCo and has outcome measures related to McDevCo. So that's not, so, and you know, I wouldn't be, I actually proposed and did not receive support for, but I proposed removing several of the three objective measures that are under EED because a lot of those do not relate to things that the board does. So I'm open, and I think I didn't get a good response from the EED committee, so I don't know if the committee would be open, but I'm open to, looking at, are these three objective measures the most closely aligned with our county's function and role? So, thank you.
So any other discussion? If not, we'll leave this up to the board to ferret out. All right. We will move on then to 8.7. Came out of the Infrastructure Committee and modifications to supporting broadband. The modifications are highlighted. And taking out the word financial, changing the dates, modify the 10.2B. Any questions relative to what the committee did? All right, then now Supervisor Zhang, you had a request.
Yes. So I guess objective part of the comprehensive plan. One of the items that we have on there is objective 3.8, and I get, and as I mentioned earlier, that's been the roles and responsibility of the Diversity Affairs Commission has been distributed to these standing committees here, and I'm also surprised to see that now is that some of that we can potentially look at this and try and incorporate some of it as well too. I think under objective 10.6 of the EED strategic plan, where it states some of the, for example, specifically under some of the outcome measurables, such as the under the outcome measure 2, or and under the strategies. I wonder if is there a way that we can probably put for maybe a strategy C or something, add something along the lines of working with the Greater Wausau Prosperity Partnership to achieve their strategy 1.22, 1.22 and 1.21 of their strategic planning as well too, something along that lines, but really being a part of their the initiatives as well too, and their efforts as well too, to try and develop the economic status of our community here in Central Wisconsin. But just maybe as a strategy C or something along that lines there. Just a thought.
So we have two options. You can advance that today, or we can work on it and bring it back at the next meeting, consistent with what we've done with 12.3.
I would be comfortable with us working on it and bringing it back to at the next meeting. It's more of just bringing this up as a item of discussion.
All right, any thoughts on that item of discussion? Supervisor Lemmer.
So last week I was at the Greater Wausau Economic Summit, and there was a man named Dennis Winters. He is the chief economist of the Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development, and he said that there are, 4 solutions to our human resources problems, and one of them was removing barriers to chronic unemployment, and he specifically called out chronic transportation, housing, and childcare insecurity, as well as skills gaps. So I think what Supervisor Zhang is talking about has big ramifications for us, and I think it merits discussion.
Okay. So I will leave it to Supervisor Zhang to perhaps work with staff relative to formalizing that as an objective and a strategy, and bring that back at our next meeting. Anything else at this time? Anything else? All right, if not, we'll go on to the committee work plan, and I apologize, I had completed this last week and realized that yesterday that it wasn't in the packet. At our August 23rd meeting, we had agreed that there would be 4 priorities, work items for the committee. One was ARPA, basically establish criteria for the review and ranking of projects, which we started, but I think we're continuing to monitor. We talked about an overall property management, and within that, the policy and the sale, disposition of excess county property, and tax delinquent property process and policy setting, and the long-term facilities plan. Under TIF, tax increment financing, pursue legislative recommendations and criteria for guiding representation on the local joint review committee. And then cultural competence, promote cultural competencies in county employment policies and the design and delivery of county programs and services. There are action items associated with that, but those were the items that we had talked about, trying to focus in on. There's a longer list, including renewable energy and other items, but is that what you want us to focus in on for our top 4 priorities, with one of those priorities being multifaceted relative to property management, facility planning, and how we deal with the tax delinquency issue? Are you content with that? And I would just point out on the tax increment districts that Administrator Leonard had shared a email relative to an upcoming session on tax increment districts 101, or tax increment financing 101. If people want to attend, I would encourage that. I know that there is a lot of discussion in the community because Fred Schaefer from Rib Mountain asked me some questions about what we were doing because of recent discussions at McDevco. But I think it's appropriate for us to do a deep dive on what the county's role is and what our options are and what thoughts we have on modifying the legislation relative to TIF. But is this capture what you feel we should be working on? The cultural competence is read out of the rules. The others are there. We can elaborate, or we can elaborate at a later date. Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We can always tackle those things first, and once they start moving off the list, we can update the plan too, but it's important to narrow down what we're working on first. So I would support that list.
Supervisor Leahy.
I would also support this. I think especially discussing more of our in-depth policies regarding property management is also very timely, considering the economic development that's going on within the city of Wausau, and considering how many properties we have that are on pretty prime real estate. I think that would behoove us. Regarding ARPA, I do feel like we have a pretty good handle on that, at least as far as we've started that process. We've had requests coming in. We've been dealing with some of those. So I guess that doesn't feel like something that might take up as much time, since we've already done a lot of that work. So I would like to see the renewable energy issue maybe move up a little bit. But I do support these four concepts. Thank you.
So earlier in the meeting, we had talked about trying to advance a task force, which would be independent of this group. Do you not want to do that and instead rely on this committee? Again, this is meant to be a committee work plan where we would focus our efforts. So,
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yes, as long as the task force is agendized and we do have that discussion sooner rather than later.
all right. I've made a note to put that on the agenda for a future meeting for a recommendation. Chair Gibbs.
Could I suggest, if we're going to have the potential creation of a task force on renewable energy, that Supervisor Lemmer and myself or several other people look at the rules on creation of a charter as to what the outcomes are for the task force, so that we have a meaningful discussion on that. So I invite yourself and whoever else wants to at least discuss the creation of a charter.
Is that acceptable? We may want to just, within the evaluate criteria for the review and ranking of projects under ARPA, I think we also want to track the spending. We want to monitor activities, because we will need to adjust those numbers to make sure that we encumber the dollars by December of 2024 and actually spend the money by December of 2026. So if I could just suggest that maybe that be expanded to establish criteria for the review and ranking of projects and monitor progress. Chair Gibbs.
I think you bring up a great point, because even though we've allocated some of those resources for potentially expansion of broadband, whether or not those projects actually hit the ground, and we are committed then to those resources, or those resources lapse back into, one thing that we don't want to do, in my opinion, is allow those resources to lapse back to the federal government to be reallocated. They can be utilized in the county here. We clearly have seen the need. The applications for ARPA funding has clearly exceeded our allocation of the 26 point some million. So like I said, we need to track that very closely so that we don't let those lapse.
So if you're comfortable with this, a motion to accept this as a committee work plan, understanding we can go back and revisit it at any time, would be in order. Supervisor Jean.
I'll make that motion.
All right, is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Lemmer. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. And as we did with the past plan 2 years ago, we will begin to identify within these who are the staff people that we work with, what are they expected, begin to refine the outcomes. We'll bring that back, and what are some of the target dates for doing that. So we will bring that forward. I know that the TIDs are a high priority, and we'll give that attention immediately. And again, I'd direct you to the email from Administrator Leonard relative to that tax increment finance 101. We'll also provide you with some of the legislative Audit Bureau reports and other things from a link. And I know that Supervisor Marshall has accumulated a good amount of information relative to TIFs as well. And we'll make sure that that is available and it is a resource to us as we begin that effort. So, anything else? If not, we will move on to educational items. First item is the ARPA update. Again, we are in the process of trying to reconcile some of the dollars. We had originally earmarked about $3.9 million for broadband. It looks like right now the commitment is in the neighborhood of $1 million, just under $1.4 million. And we're trying to reconcile exactly how we use the old capital improvement funding for that, but we won't need that entire amount. We also had for the PTO buyback. We budgeted $500,000. We're spending a lot less. We want to continue to monitor that. We are in round two. I'll turn it over to the administrator.
Sure, and I don't have this in your packet, but I'm sharing it on the screen just so you can all see. You in fact have received all of the second round submissions that are on the form, and we'll go through those when the committee puts it on the agenda, but you are now also in the third round. And good news for you, you received your first third round application as well. So as alluded to by Board Chair Gibbs, you have received a significant number of applications that do exceed the total amount of funding that has been allocated through the American Rescue Plan Act to Marathon County. But in keeping with the comments from Committee Chair Robinson, you can see at the far right, you do have a number of projects that initially you allocated funds for. However, based on the board's action and the amount necessary for expenditure, a significant amount of those funds are able to be reallocated. Committee Chair Robinson referenced a number of them already, but the next step for the committee, as I see it as staff, is for the committee to evaluate the second round submissions that you've received. And in terms of total dollar amount for those submissions, you've received in the second round alone about just shy of $5.3 million worth of projects from external entities. You did have the $1.85 million the request was received from Aurora Central. You've already acted upon that, but that was a second round submission, so I have left that in that column. But I would anticipate that shortly after the budget is adopted by the full board, that the next item on your agenda is going to be ARPA related. Based on the calendar that you've set forth, that's kind of what's envisioned moving forward. I don't know, Mr. Chair, if there was anything else you wanted me to walk through, but I can certainly make sure that this list is in your packet at your next meeting.
Any discussion or questions? Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to know if we could get the number, and I don't know, maybe I wasn't paying attention closely, but the number with the returned allocations and that whole, because right now I'm kind of lost as to how much ARPA we actually have left, because we encumbered a bunch of things and then we're getting some back, so now that number is kind of fuzzy. Like, I did some math last week for the budget, and I have like 3 different numbers as to what we could have in ARPA right now. And I would feel better if I had a definite answer from staff as to where ARPA sits with those reallocations right now. And I
Well,
understand
we have
that it's not
reallocations and we have budgeted amounts. So there is money in the budget that we're proposing relative to the Marathon Park water project, the utilities, and North Central Healthcare. So we want to reflect those in a different category versus approved.
And I think it might work best if we just get that number after the budget. I mean, I think that, I understand that the budget might make things a little uneven as of right now, so I'm very happy with getting that total after everything is said and done with the budget. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? We will, as a regular check-in, we'll check in no less than quarterly on where we are, and particularly as it relates to how we are in spending some of those encumbrances, just to make sure we stay on top of that. All right. Opioid settlement, Chair Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of things to update the committee on. Last week, received a email correspondence with counsel that is in charge of the suit on behalf of Marathon County due to the opioid pandemic. There was three companies that had filed bankruptcy, Malincourt, Purdue, and Enduro, and they needed us to sign because the courts had approved a distribution of those settlement funds, and Marathon County was a recipient of some of those. And so now we did receive an additional roughly $102,000 that was added to the 90-some thousand that was received on the initial settlement. So we're sitting on right now roughly $200,000 in the opioid settlement fund itself. WCA is working with bond counsel and on potential securitization. One of the challenges that has been brought forward is if the bond counsel issues bonds based on the idea that these companies will pay X dollars into the future up to 18 years, and those dollars are to be used for opioid abatement, is there a challenge or is there a issue with the companies that issued the bonds that pay out us? So they're working through some legal issues right now. They're hoping to have some of those answers soon. And obviously, the things that keep changing, one of the changes is the interest rate. And so what that means as far as yield to if a county, and the amount of participation in the number of counties is also a factor in what those dollars are that we would have to look at as to whether or not we'd want to securitize our portion. I hope to be able to provide some additional clarity within a month or two as far as how that securitization is going, and provide some kind of insight as to information that this committee is going to need to make a recommendation to the full board as that goes. We also are looking at where is there opportunities to discuss what those funds are or what funds are utilized for. I think North Central Healthcare has some potentials, but that being said, nothing's been finalized on that yet.
Kurt, do you have an approximate timeline for when some of that information will be finalized?
On the leadership call on Monday, WCA mentioned that they were hoping, and Andy Phillips had mentioned, they were hoping to have some additional information on securitization within the next month, 2 at the latest.
All right, any questions relative to the opioid settlement? If not, next item is 2023 budget discussion. I'm going to just start out. During the discussion, there were comments made relative to the audit and our compliance. I had a chance to talk to John Rader from Baker Tilly and review the management letters. We don't have that agendized on the agenda today, but I would like to just go back and revisit what was raised by Baker Tilly in their audit. Some of them are, I think, global concerns that he raises for all units of government relative to the collections in decentralized offices, such as parks and health department and others. There has been action taken, and I think it probably is in our interest as a committee, and we don't have an audit committee, but this committee serves in that role, that we should go back and revisit the management letters and make sure that we address those concerns. And some of those concerns will be addressed by the new finance system, Workday, and the ERP process going forward. But I think in light of the fact that we don't have it agendized, and it did come up in the context of the budget, but we will take action going, at a future meeting to review and act on that. But I know the administrator has some comments.
I just had one, so I hope I don't have more. After the meeting, Supervisor Dickinson raised a question, and he has now caught a mistake in each of my last two budgets, and I endeavor to not have him catch one next time. But in terms of the FTE count, that's, I believe, on page 24 of the budget message. All of the departmental references are accurate, but I have to own the fact that the total, where it reflects 706.72 positions, that's inaccurate. It is actually 699 699.58. That's correct for both 2022 and 2023 in the budget. And just real quickly on the reason for that, we eliminated in 2022, and we've talked about this at this committee and at other committees, 6 full-time equivalent positions within the sheriff's office as a result of the closure of the shelter home, and we're delivering that service differently. We also, in working with the health officer, we eliminated 1.75 previously allocated FTE positions within the health department. We implemented that within calendar year 2022, and we're continuing that FTE, the FTE current load moving into the 2023 budget. We had a 0.25 FTE increase in Parks, Recreation, and Forestry, which was approved by the board, and we had a total 0.36 FTE increase across several positions at the library based on some just reallocations, again, across a number of positions. But in total, that was an overstatement of 7.14. So the correct number is 699.58.
Does that make it 2 mistakes for both years? Just wanted to know,
I
for the
say
record.
it's one. I say it's one. My initial root cause analysis is that I made the changes in a table in a Word document as opposed to the Excel spreadsheet. So while all the numbers working horizontally are accurate, the total Word does not tabulate as Excel does. So I own that. That is purely my mistake, but I wanted to make everyone aware of it.
Are there any other questions relative to the budget? The next meeting, we will be doing the deep dive into it. I think we continue to wait for other supervisors to generate any amendments, and will give us a chance to talk through those at the next meeting. All right. Our next meeting is November 9th. Do you have any, I think we've got a full agenda for that meeting and probably for the one later in the month. County Clerk Kim Trueblood had asked whether or not we would meet the second meeting in November, given the fact that we just adopted a work plan that has a lot of activity. I would like to keep that meeting. We may have to move the location due to some canvassing, election audits. So we may be in a different location, but I'd like to keep that meeting with the thought that in December we'll only have one meeting because of the holidays. But I'm reluctant to give up 2 meetings in a row, given our workload. So we will meet, but just pay attention to where we meet for that second meeting in November. Are there any, with the work plan and with our normal business, is there anything else you'd like to see us focus in on? I know Supervisor Zhang, you've continued to ask about where we are with relative to a diverse workforce at some point in time. Maybe we could impose on Molly to bring in where we are relative to some of our current hiring practices and results. We'll schedule that. Anything else? If not, I know that we will at one of our future meetings have a presentation about how we handle claims. Mary Jo Malley will be bringing that in as purely an educational item. We'll work with her on that, and it was prompted by a recommendation for denial of a claim. And just so you have an understanding of what the role is of the county, of this committee and the county board in that process. So we will also be going through how we work with our insurance agent or insurance company and what our policies and procedures are relative to claim management. So anything else? If not, a motion to adjourn is in order. Supervisor Leahy, seconded by Supervisor Marshall. All those in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries.